Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Quarantine Film Series. I'm your host, Kabir Sehgal. Great to be back. Very special show today. Very special show. I'm here in Atlanta, hanging with my parents, still undergoing the quarantine. And it's a special show because we have a remarkable guest. I'll tell you about him in a second. This show, as you know, we started the show back in March. We've done over 120 episodes at this point, and this is a platform for creative individuals to share what they're working on, whether it's music, whether it's films, because the gigs and the film festivals have been canceled. And so we wanted to create a spotlight for people who create the stories that challenge, provoke us, and entertain us. So anyone who comes on the show, we just love having them here. Please check out all their streaming links, all their websites, and subscribe to their social media so you can get in the loop. Also subscribe to me on social media so you get notified on when we're going live and the guests ahead of the broadcast so you can do your homework and ask questions accordingly. All right, so today's guest, very special. It's exciting because he's from Mumbai, the mother country where my parents came from. And he's an Indian documentary filmmaker known for his socio-political, human rights-oriented films. It's a very gripping material that he's filmed and produced. Some of his films explore the rise of religious fundamentalism, sectarianism, casteism in India, while others investigate the national nuclear program and unsustainable development. His notable films include War and Peace, Comrade, Reason, his most recent one, which won the Best Documentary Feature Prize at the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam. And that's a big deal, that festival in particular. So all of his films, many of his films have, we're going to ask him about this, have provoked serious dialogue and even censorship from the Indian government. And so it's with that, I want to welcome to the show the incredible artist, auteur, filmmaker, conceptual artist, remarkable individual, Anand Patwardhan. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So tell me first, I always like to ask, how has the quarantine affected you, Anand? What did you have lined up that you were going to do that's been canceled or postponed?
Well, just before the quarantine was imposed, there were huge protests all over the country against the Citizenship Amendment Act that the government had brought in. CAA, and that Amendment Act was basically making second-class citizens out of Muslims. So it was directed against the minority, and it changed their status. It would have changed their status, but all across the country, people from different religions and castes and creeds basically came out in the street in protest. But all this protests had to go virtually underground because of the spreading of the virus and the lockdown. So we are in a kind of a limbo. Now everyone's stuck at home. Not everyone, but many people are. And the virus is basically pretty much out of control, like it has been in America. Our death rate is much lower than America, but the actual incidence of people getting sick is higher. I mean, we have a bigger population, obviously.
Right. Tell me, Anand, how have you structured your days? Because you're a creative person. Do you wake up at the same time? Do you have a routine? What does your day-to-day life look like, and how have you maintained your creativity?
Well, one thing that had to change was that I used to get up in the morning and play tennis, but that has been stopped. But the rest of my working day hasn't changed radically, except that I don't go out to shoot anymore. Right now, I'm not doing any outdoor stuff. I'm actually staying home and working on home movie. Basically, I found that I had filmed at home with my parents when they were alive, and over the years, because I always had a camera with me, and over the years I'd shot family things. So in a sense, it's going to be a film that'll be of interest to the family, but maybe some bits of it might be interesting to others as well. So it's like a home movie.
Good. You're making the best of your situation.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Why did you want to become a filmmaker? What was it early in your life that spoke to you that you wanted to create films for a living?
Actually, funnily enough, the first time I picked up a camera was in America. I was on a scholarship studying at Brandeis University in 1970, and that was right in the middle of the Vietnam War. So my university, along with Berkeley, were the two East Coast and West Coast centers of protests against the Vietnam War. So people like me spent as much time doing protests as going to class. And in fact, the very first time I went to jail was in America, protesting the Vietnam War. Uh, that was 1970, and I came back to India in 1972. And so the first time I picked up a camera was to protest the anti-war movement. And then later on in India, I slowly fell into filmmaking. By accident, I was part of people's movements for democracy and against corruption, etc. And borrowed equipment to start with and filmed that, and later on bought my own camera.
Wow. So you've had a strong streak of civil disobedience, your own Satyagraha soul force movement that you've been having for a whole life now. And by the way, I've got to say, I like hearing the noise outside, or it reminds me of the Indian street music, the sounds of Mumbai, city life.
Yeah, are you getting a lot of extra sound?
No, not a lot, but it just reminds me of being in Mumbai with the horns and stuff.
Less than when there's no lockdown.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. So tell me first, I want people to know about your film, Reason. What is Reason about, and why did you want to spend, I mean, so much time goes into making these movies. Why did you want to spend a significant portion of your waking hours making this movie?
Yeah, Reason took almost 4 years to make. And I mean, the film previous to that, which you're also, I think, going to feature here, Bhim Comrade, took 14 years. So Reason was a quickie in that sense. It was only 4 years. Reason I began to make because there have been a series of killings of rationalists in our country that began in 2013 and have continued. I mean, the four killings that I concentrate on in Reason are of Dr. Dabholkar, who was a rationalist fighting against superstition, Comrade Pansare, who was a labor leader and who was 80 years old, and M.M. Kalburgi, the professor in Karnataka, and Gauri Lankesh, a journalist. And all these people were killed because of their opposition to the rise of fundamentalism in the country, basically. And so the film follows that trajectory, but it also looks at many other things like killings in the name of people eating beef. People have been killed for their food habits. So it follows, and also the caste system. There was the suicide of Rohit Vemula, who was a Dalit. Dalit means literally means the oppressed, but it refers to the people who were called untouchables in the past. I mean, and he came from a Dalit background, and he was a PhD scholar, and he committed suicide. So it was an induced suicide because of discrimination that he faced and his group faced.
And what was the response to the movie among people who watched it, but also among policymakers in the government?
So, I mean, as you probably know, we right now have the most right-wing government that we've ever had. And civil liberties have been seriously curtailed. And this film virtually is not easy to show in public gatherings. I mean, it has no censor certificate. It has been basically it's been shown outside the country at festivals, and it's been shown inside the country via various means, which I can't tell you all of those ways in which we are showing the film still. But these screenings are always fraught with some amount of danger. And even some of my previous films, which have a censor certificate, have been attacked by the right wing when screenings were going on. So we're living in pretty dangerous times right now.
Yeah. I want to ask maybe a more political question. What was the opening after Manmohan Singh left power? What was the opening that Modi saw to get his grip on power? Why did he come to power? Because up until then, it seemed Congress had a grip on the party or on Indian politics. What was the opening? Was it the lack of leadership of the Congress party? How do you assess that?
It's a very complicated story. The Congress Party was traditionally the party that has enjoyed power for the longest time. But the right wing, I'm talking about the BJ, what is now called the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party. Their origin is in the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, uh, and both the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha pre-independence, basically none of them fought against British rule. They collaborated with the British. They also were responsible for killing Mahatma Gandhi. As you know, Mahatma Gandhi was killed by an upper caste Hindu. Uh, and these parties, these groupings, uh, had that ideology, and so it's shocking that they are the ones who are in power today. They're the
Right.
they, in my eyes, they're the people who killed Gandhi.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's quite an unfortunate
So,
turn.
so
Mhm.
one of the reasons why the Congress uh, didn't do well in 2014 was corruption. But corruption actually, if you look at the corruption that's going on right now, it's many times, many folds greater than the corruption that brought the Congress Party down. But today, the ruling government has controlled every institution. So the media is fully controlled. I mean, they've embedded media. They have the judiciary more or less under control all over the country. Of course, the police and the military, etc. So there are this kind of democratic spaces that existed when the Congress was in power do not exist right now.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I also want to ask about the craft of reason. You said it took 4 years. People always like asking what kind of, or people always like learning from us, what kind of cameras did you shoot on? What was the editing process like? And we always like to ask, tell me about the soundtrack, the music. We're music producers here, so tell us about the music in the film.
So one of the things I think you should understand is that my filmmaking has always been very low level, low tech filmmaking. I mean, even from the beginning, I started with black and white film cameras. With some of them in the beginning were hand cranked. We're talking about 1974, and later when I got into video in the 90s, it was high eight and then mini DV. And Reason is the first film that I shot on HD. I still haven't started shooting 4K. So in that sense, I'm like, uh, technologically, I've never used the latest equipment, and the films basically stand because of the content and because of and how maybe how the story is told.
Exact. I hear you. And the music, you said.
The music has always been a great part of all my films, but I almost never use background music, in the sense that I don't like to. I'm sort of a purist in that sense, because I don't like to use external sound to enhance the mood. But I often use the music that I find. So it's the music of the people in the film.
Yeah.
You most often you see the people performing, and you might hear their music even off camera, but you know where that music is coming from.
Right, right, right. Okay. I want to ask you about your other film, Bhim Comrade, which you said took many years, 14 years to create.
Yeah.
What is this film about? What's the plot and through line of this film?
Okay. As It's almost like, it seems funny that both these films start with deaths and killings. I mean, the Reason started with the killing of the rationalists. Jai Bhim Comrade started when the police fired into a group of Dalit uh, people in Mumbai. In those days, it was Bombay, 1997, and and basically people were protesting because the statue of Dr. Ambedkar, who was the leader of the Dalit movement, um, his statue was desecrated by a garland of footwear, and people came out on the streets to protest. They were not violent protests; they were just sitting and blocking traffic. And the police arrived, and without warning, without uh, tear gas or anything like that, they took out their guns and shot into the demonstrators, and then shot into the colony where the people lived. And they killed 10 Dalits on the spot. And a this a friend of mine who was a musician, Vilas Gogre, with whom I'd worked in a previous film called Bombay Our City, on the slums of Bombay, and his song runs through that film. He lived near this colony. He visited the colony after the killings, and he got so depressed that he went home and committed suicide. He hung himself in his own tiny hut that he lived in. He was also from the Dalit community, but he was also a Marxist, and so it was shocking that he would take his own life, and that made me explore not just the incident of the police firing, but I also started exploring the poetry and music of the Dalit community. So the whole film follows musicians and people who are using music as a form of protest.
You are following up with your movie as a form of protest, right? And so, how do you think about filmmaking as a sign of social conversation? And I don't know if it's civil disobedience, but are you ever scared of what the reaction may be or what the response may be because what you're doing may be called subversive?
Of course, it is called subversive by those who don't like it, but it is probably a morale booster for those who are already fighting, and they're taking much greater risks than I am by filming. I go in and out of situations, but there are many people who are facing those situations head on all the time. So, so yeah, the film is a documenting of that work.
Sure. Ryan in Boston has a question for you. He says, Anand, how do you know which project to take on? How do you know what to make a movie about?
I don't see one. My films are never funded by anyone. There's no. If you look at the credits in my films, you don't see "thank you" to any grant money or any sponsors. So they are. I don't have a deadline that I have to meet. I don't write a script and send it to anyone. These films sort of develop integrally. I mean, I'm following my instincts with my we have our own small team of people who shoot, and we have equipment, so when things happen we try to be at the right place at the right time often enough, and then the rest of the film takes shape on the editing table as you look at all your material and you see what the patterns are. So I don't to answer your question, i could be I could be working on more than one project at a time, because there's uh, because I'm following my nose and looking, looking where things are interesting, and not everything might fit into one film. So over time, these become more than one film.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, for instance, while I was making um uh, Bhim Comrade, I also made War and Peace, because War and Peace was made about the anti-nuclear movement that began when India and Pakistan both did nuclear tests in May 1998. And so the whole world became slightly more dangerous because these two countries that have often gone to war with each other now had nuclear weapons. And anywhere, any nuclear war will never stay localized. The whole world will get involved in it, and so it was a dangerous moment. And I started documenting the peace movement both in India and Pakistan, and that is War and Peace. I also, by the way, went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki to look
Hmm.
at what had happened there, and then I happened to be in a film festival in America, and I had my camera, so I filmed at the Smithsonian Institute, which had a war museum where they were celebrating. They were talking about the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. It was 50th anniversary of that, And that exhibition actually got censored. That exhibition got taken off because America has never uh, fessed up to the damage it did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the sense that I think I'm right about this. Uh, the American students see the damage to Hiroshima and Nagasaki from a long shot. You see, the bomb going off, or you see the plane dropping the stuff, but you don't see it close up down on the ground what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, so Smithsonian Institute was actually had prepared an exhibition. They were talking about all these, the ground reality of what happened in Japan, but the both Democrats and Republicans were against this exhibition, and it got taken off.
Mm-hmm.
So I interviewed the people who were originally going to go ahead with that exhibition but couldn't do it.
I remember when the nuclear bombs were announced by Vajpayee, it was such a, it was obviously international news. I was less familiar that there was a movement in India that was against the nuclearization. This is news to me. Talk a little
Both,
about,
both India and Pakistan,
right,
because
right.
we War and Peace shows that I actually was able to go to Pakistan in that moment because we were part of a peace movement between India and Pakistan, where people were trying to build people to people relationships, even though the governments were at war. But we wanted to build friendship, so we exchanged visits wherever we got visas.
Were there any policymakers or politicians on both sides that were espousing this position, that were pro-peace, anti-nuclearization during
Pro
this
peace,
time?
pro peace politicians were very hard to find.
Yeah, this probably still are.
Yeah.
I have a question about just the industry. So many people around the world are familiar with the Bollywood space. Talk to me about the documentary space in India. Is there a market for it? How big is the community? What is the ecosystem like for documentarians in India?
Okay, so this has changed over time. And when I started out making documentaries, there was absolutely nothing. I mean, almost nothing, in the sense that there was a government documentary, a place that made documentaries for the government. So there were a lot of documentaries made, about some interesting ones, and some were just ministers cutting ribbons and things like that, politicians making speeches. But independent documentary was almost non-existent. Uh, but over time, there is a documentary movement in India, and it's growing. Some of the funding comes from abroad because there are festivals and there are funds that have been created, and many Indian filmmakers are also now getting access to that. I don't take money from anyone while making a film, but many people have done that, and uh, that movement is growing. So we do see a lot of good documentaries now, and in fact, one of the things that I'm doing in the lockdown is that every week we program. We used to do this every month. We used to show a good documentary in a public space every month in Mumbai. But now under the lockdown, we've gone online, like you have, and every week we show a good documentary, an international documentary, and people ask questions by text and get answered by the filmmakers. So we started with a film on Noam Chomsky called Manufacturing Consent, an old film made by friends of mine in Canada. And we did a Q&A in which Chomsky also participated. And so since then, we've been showing lots of films, some Indian films, some films from outside the country. And it's doing very well. It's getting good viewership.
Right. Well, I would consider you one of the deans of the Indian documentary movement. So, everyone who's watching, please check out Anand's website. You see it here at the bottom, patwardhan.com. And you can see he has a page with all of his movies and some of the works. He's an author and a writer as well, very astute political observer. With that, I want to thank Anand for being on the show. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to the broadcast. I also want to give a hat tip to my friend Shane, who produces the show. And, Shane's actually wearing a hat right now, so I'm tipping my virtual hat to him. And check out his Spanish tortilla. He's a very good chef. If you're in his neck of the woods, Shane's a very good chef. So thanks, everyone, for watching. Keep it here. We're going to bring you more great conversations with filmmakers. And everyone have a great day. Stay safe. Take care, everyone.